This is a vintage Korg MS-20 synthesizer. Amongst other unique features, it had a section called the external signal processor, and this allowed users to plug a monophonic signal, such as a microphone or a guitar playing single notes or any other instrument playing single notes, and hypothetically you could play the synthesizer using this external signal. The external signal processor section made use of an electronic component called a phase-locked loop. This was also how most early guitar synthesizers detected pitch. Under the right circumstances, they worked pretty good, but they didn't track super fast and they were known to be a little glitchy, and this is kind of part of the fun of the MS-20 external signal processor section. Here I plugged a microphone into the external signal processor input. How about a little guitar? The ESP-20 module replicates the MS-20's external signal processor functionality. Here I have a microphone plugged into my audio interface, routed to Voltage's ESP-20 module via the I/O panel external inputs. You can see right here, this is my audio in from host, and this is going to the input of the ESP-20 module. The outputs of the ESP-20 are as follows. The ESP-20 has a frequency to voltage CV out, and that's the equivalent of your pitch CV. So I've got that plugged into the keyboard CV input of the VCO20. And then the envelope output tracks the amplitude. It doesn't do anything with pitch. And I'm using that plugged into a regular VCA or amplifier. So turning on my microphone. Da, 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 da. Ooh. With lots of practice, you'll sing as great as I do. Let's go over ESP-20's controls. You'll notice I've rearranged the patch in more of a standard oscillator, filter, amplifier configuration, and I've done this just to sort of show off what ESP-20 does. ESP-20's first stage is just a basic amplifier, and the signal level knob over here adjusts its level. So I've got the oscillator signal going to the input here, I've got the output of the amplifier right here, and this is going straight to my VCA. So if I play the oscillator through it, we can adjust our level here. There's a little overload light here, although it's not super critical, but the level can affect how it tracks. If I take this cable right here and I move it down one, now it's going to go through this bandpass filter stage. And the bandpass filter comprises this high cut frequency and low cut frequency, and we stuck to how the original was labeled. The high cut is actually a low pass filter, so you'll be able to hear these working. That's my low pass. That's my high pass. And you can use these together. The important thing to understand, though, is these aren't really intended to be used as regular filters. They're intended to sort of narrow down the frequency going to the pitch and envelope detection. So you can use these to sort of dial in what's going in and make it track a little better. Moving along, you'll see our signal flow goes kind of this way, and this is where the pitch CV is output. So let's go back to the previous patch. While we're talking about the frequency CV out, I should also mention the CV offset control. This adds or subtracts a voltage to whatever's coming through the pitch CV, and it effectively functions as a transpose control. Ba, 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 ba. If I open up the gain on the amplifier, this is like holding down a key on the keyboard. And this is sort of the nominal pitch. But with the mic open, I'm going to move the oscilloscope to the envelope output of the ESP-20. Here you'll be able to see how the ESP-20 tracks amplitude, and I'm going to mess with the signal level a little bit too. Bum, 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 bum. Here I've moved the CV for the amplifier to the gate out and the scope as well. Now the difference between these two is that the envelope out follows the input of what's coming into it level-wise, whereas the gate is either on or off. In other words, 0 volts or 5 volts. And the threshold knob sets the tipping point for when it's going to go to 5 volts. So if I turn the mic on, with my threshold at maximum, it doesn't do anything. And as I turn it to the left, da, 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 there's my point right there. Da, 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 and you can see I'm getting 5 volts. Now I've repatched the trigger out. The trigger out works exactly like the gate out, but instead of outputting a constant 5 volts, it outputs a very quick pulse, bup, 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 And this is useful for things like triggering drums. And if you think about it, this can be really useful if you're running a drum loop into it or a drum sound for triggering other drums or other noises. So there's a lot more you can do with the ESP-20 module than warbling through a microphone like I did. You can do the same kind of guitar shenanigans I was doing with the MS-20. In this patch, I've replicated a pretty famous guitar plugged into ARP 2600 patch. So what's happening is the guitar is coming in through the external input, and then I'm running it through a distortion over here, and then the output of that goes into the input of the VCF-20 filter. I've also taken the guitar and split it to the ESP-20 input, and I'm not using any pitch tracking. You can see there's nothing plugged in here. But what I am using is the envelope out to track my picking, and I'm using that as a mod source to modulate the cutoff frequency of the filter. You can also see I've got another cable coming from this LFO over here, and that's what gives us the characteristic wah 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 sound. So I'm using two mod sources for the cutoff frequency, and then the output of that goes into an amplifier, and you'll see I'm also using the gate out, and the reason why I'm doing that is the gate is sort of acting as a master on-off switch, because if I don't do that, the filter will have an audible wah 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 noise just from it being modulated by the LFO. In this patch I've loaded up a standard drum loop, and I've taken its output and I've routed it to the mixer so you can hear it, but I've also routed the drum loop to ESP-20. Now obviously a drum loop doesn't really have much pitch content to it, but that doesn't mean we still can't try to convert it to pitches using ESP-20. So I can take the frequency out over here and route to the keyboard CV of an oscillator, and let's bring that up. So it's staying roughly in the same place. But I also took the envelope out and I routed that to the frequency mod input, and things start getting pretty crazy and squirrely. I also took the envelope out and I routed it to the pulse width modulation input. So on a pulse wave, you can actually see the wave move as the drum plays. And you can get some pretty crazy effects just playing with the mod amounts. Or we can go to sine waves for more of a disco space drum effect.